They showed up on a Wednesday, in perfect polos and perfect smiles, and they handed me a letter like it was a dinner invitation, only the invitation said I owed them for living on the land my grandfather sold me with his last breath. That's how it began. 3 sentences that made the porch go quiet and put a weight in my chest I hadn't felt since boot camp. My name is Tom Archer, and I thought my little stand of vegetables and jars of jam was the kind of quiet trouble that only chickens and weather could cause. I was wrong. I'll be honest with you. I didn't set out to make trouble. I put up a rough sign, Maple Ridge Stand, take what you need, pay what you can, because Mrs. Holloway across the lane needed fresh food while she healed, and because the land felt empty without hands on it. It was simple, and it was small, and for a while that was enough. Folks came by, folks smiled, and sometimes someone left $1 folded into a tomato husk. Sometimes a kid traded a comic for a jar of pickles. It was the kind of barter that makes a place feel alive. Then Vivian Cole, the newly elected president of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association, decided my stand was the problem she was going to fix. She came once with sunglasses low, clipboard high, and a voice trained in the curt syllables of people who believe rules are the point of life. "Mr. Archer," she said, and I'd never heard anyone say my name like it was evidence. "This constitutes unpermitted commercial activity in a residential zone." I laughed at first, because it sounded ridiculous, and then I watched her smile grow thin as she explained fines and citations and the sanctity of covenants no one read until it suits them. "You're right on the line, Tom," she said, tapping the paper like a judge. "We all love a good neighborly effort, but rules are rules." That's when it shifted from petty to personal. The letters arrived: fines, warnings, photographs with time stamps. Neighbors whispered at the mailbox, and someone parked a camera on the old oak that pointed right at my driveway. I started to feel like a man who kept getting measured for a crime he didn't commit. I started to spend nights at the kitchen table, digging through deeds, county records, and old maps, because I didn't want this to be a story where the loudest voice wins. I wanted it to be a story where facts matter. There's a particular kind of shame that comes when a community decides you're the drama, when the same people who once waved now avert their eyes. I could see why Vivian wanted the stand gone. Control tastes good when you're its owner, and a neighbor doing good without permission is an irritant. But there was more in her tone than policy. There was a small, brittle contempt, and I later found out she'd had a run-in with my brother years ago over a tree line. Grudges have a way of wearing governance like armor. So I did something I hadn't planned. I documented. I cataloged the jars, the receipts. I found the old survey that showed the lane, and I talked to Sheriff Ramos, who knows this county the way you know the back roads. He came out, bought a jar of peach preserves, and told me plain, "Tom, what you're doing doesn't look like a felony, but it sure looks like someone flexing." That's when I realized this fight wasn't just about my stand. It was about what happens when rules are used like weapons. Vivian doubled down. She called a special HOA hearing and invited a local news crew to cover the situation. I watched her practice the lines she wanted in public, the patent concern of someone who wants to look like they're protecting property values. The camera lights made everything sharper, and that's where the story did the thing stories do. It showed more than it intended. The sheriff showed up, neighbors who had benefited from the stand showed up, and one by one they told their stories. One woman, a high school teacher, said she'd brought a nephew who'd never tasted a homegrown tomato and watched him grin like it was the first time he'd believed something was real. Someone else pointed out that the county had a right to farm clause tucked into an ordinance that didn't buy the HOA's argument. It was at the mediation, a courthouse annex that smelled of coffee and old paper, where Vivian settled into the role of antagonist like she'd been born for it. She leaned forward, clipped and theatrical, and said, "Mr. Archer, this is about community standards." I leaned back and said, "No, Vivian, it's about a man trying to feed his neighbor." There are lines I'll remember, her eyes narrowing when I mentioned my grandfather, the way a board member cleared their throat like they were reconsidering their own comfort. Facts were on my side, but so was the slow, stubborn kindness of people who had once been customers and were now witnesses. What makes a small fight become a big one is the way people choose sides. I had a lawyer, Patrice, practical, fierce, the kind of person who teaches you that paperwork can be a weapon too. She filed a motion, we submitted the old deed, we showed the county ordinance, and we kept doing the thing the stand was supposed to do. We kept making jam, and we kept letting the lane be a place where neighbors could meet. The more Vivian tried to tighten the screws, more fines, more threats, the more the community did what communities do when they feel unfairness. They showed up. The harvest night we organized started as a way to sell a few jars and turned into a block party that made the HOA's complaint look petty and tone-deaf. There was one night I'll never forget. Vivian came to the gathering this time without the clipboard because she'd been asked to speak, and the room was full of people who remembered how the neighborhood used to look when lawns felt like territory and not a battlefield. She stood on the small stage, and for a moment I thought maybe she'd apologize. Instead, she said, "We all want order." And somebody shouted back, "We want neighbors." A chorus of murmurs rose like a tide, and in that roar I heard something that wasn't victory or defeat, but a reckoning the difference between protecting a community and policing it. Legally, things moved. The HOA's board lost 2 votes in a special election, and new members who remembered why community matters replaced them. Vivian resigned before the next meeting, carrying with her the brittle smiles and the careful copies of rules that applied only when it suited. We signed an agreement that acknowledged the stand, set reasonable guidelines, and made a small, explicit promise that no surveillance would be used to harass private homes. It was a paper victory, sure, but paper matters when it keeps you from being fined into silence. What I learned through all of this, and what I hope you hear in my voice, is that good intentions don't always protect you from power, but they do give you reason to stand up. I learned the shape of small kindness. It's jars of jam on a folding table. It's Sheriff Ramos buying preserves at a fundraiser. It's a neighbor bringing a folding chair to testify on your behalf. And I learned the ugly thing about rules. They can be noble in theory and cruel in practice when placed in hands that like to command. The last scene I carry with me is quiet. A summer morning, dew on the grass, the stand open, and a child who'd once traded a comic now old enough to help stack boxes, laughing at something small and ordinary. I wiped the table and felt content in a way that has nothing to do with winning and everything to do with being rooted. But I don't walk away thinking everything is fixed. There's a letter in my drawer about a new developer sniffing around the ridge, and there are always people who will choose control over community when it suits them. That's the part one leave open, because life's messier than neat endings, and the best conversations are the ones that keep going. If you've been through something like this, if you've watched a neighbor's good deed become someone else's headache, if you've had to stand up to rule makers who forgot to be human, tell me about it. Do you think rules should come first, or people? Drop a comment, say where you're from, and tell the story you wish someone had told you before you walked into your fight. Share this with someone who needs to know that showing up matters. And if you liked hearing this, hit like and subscribe so we can keep telling the stories of small places doing big things. What's justice to you, a paper signed in a courthouse, or a porch where folks still trade recipes and pickles? I want to read your take.